Welcome to the Eat Away Kidney Stones podcast. I'm your host, registered dietitian and kidney stone expert, Melanie. After learning a ton about kidney stones and helping people prevent stones at the University of Chicago, I was fed up with all the terrible advice people were finding online. So I decided to do something about it. The Kidney Dietitian was born. This podcast is for people who want to learn what actually works to prevent kidney stones and still enjoy life, eating, and their favorite foods. Let's dive in. Hello and welcome to the 112th episode of the Eat Away Kidney Stones podcast. As always, I am your host, registered dietitian and kidney stone expert, Melanie Betts. And today I'm tackling a very important question, which is what kind of bread can I eat with kidney stones? Bread is obviously delicious and a staple in many people's diets. And so I think this is a really important question to tackle. And I also think, like many things, there are a lot of misconceptions out there about what kind of bread and also carbohydrates in general are good for us, especially when it comes to kidney stones and also honestly when it comes to general health, because I think that bread and carbs have such a bad reputation when in reality they actually are a critical part of most healthy diets, including very importantly, diets for kidney stone prevention, no matter what diet. Because of course, I always, like to give the caveat that there is no one diet for kidney stone prevention. Of course, it has to be individualized based on your 24-hour urine test, your other medical history, the type of stone that you have, the foods that you like to eat, most importantly, as well as your other nutrition goals. However, I can safely say that no matter what kind of kidney stone you have, carbs, or no matter who you are, no matter any of those factors that I just listed, carbohydrate doesn't have to be bread if you don't love bread, but if you do, bread is a great way actually to get in healthy carbohydrate. So let's dive into that point first before I dive into the big question of which bread specifically is best for stones. Because I think that, like I said, bread and carbs get such a bad rap. But when in reality, carbohydrate should take up about 50% of our calories. Carbs are a critical component of energy. Carbs are actually the preferred fuel for most of the cells in our body. And carbs, when they're coming from mostly healthful food sources, are a wonderful source of fiber. Fiber, we know, is so critical for the prevention of most chronic diseases, and we're learning a lot more about the importance of fiber in healthy gut microbiome and the importance of that for kidney stone prevention actually as well. And there's more and more super interesting data coming out about the role of fiber, and people who eat more fiber tend to have less kidney stones. And fiber comes from exclusively plant foods, but most of our fiber really comes from whole grains and also fruits and vegetables and plant proteins. But really the highest fiber foods are beans, nuts, and seeds, as well as these healthy whole grains. And so when we were told that carbs are bad for us, or we're trying to go on a low carb diet for whatever reason, it's really difficult to get in enough fiber. And also just energy, right? Like I said, carbs really are the body's preferred fuel source for a lot of our cells in different organs. I think the other important thing to think about when we're thinking about any kidney-friendly diet, including kidney stones and carbs, is that when we have to get our calories from someplace, right? Like our bodies need calories to survive, and our bodies need energy to survive. And we get calories from three main sources: carbohydrate, protein, and fat. You can throw in alcohol as well, but obviously we probably shouldn't be getting most of our calories or any large percentage or even notable percentage of our calories from alcohol. So that leaves really just carbohydrate, protein, and fat. These are the three major macronutrients, and this is where we get our calories from. And when we take away carbs or significantly reduce carbohydrate, aka bread, right? That means that we're gonna have to perhaps eat more of fat and protein. Now, not saying that fat and protein are bad for us, but of course we know that eating a lot of protein, especially from non-dairy animal sources, so foods like beef, pork, chicken, fish, seafood, etc., that can increase the risk of most types of kidney stones. And so it is very critical that we do not really follow a low or super low carb diet when we're working on kidney stone prevention, because when we do that, we inevitably are going to be eating a lot more protein, which may or may not be the best thing for you. This is one of the reasons why, and I have a whole other episode on this, why a ketogenic diet or a carnivore diet, these diets are so risky and are putting people at such high risk of kidney stones because they are generally so high in protein, although a ketogenic diet classically is actually not high in protein, it's very high in fat, but the way that most people are doing a ketogenic diet, of course, it's very high in protein. And you're not, you're getting the high protein, plus you're not getting all those benefits from carbohydrate, from these whole grains, which we'll talk about next, as well as fruit and other foods, plant proteins, et cetera, et cetera. And so basically what I'm trying to say is, I always talk in circles, what I'm trying to say is that carbohydrate, whether it's from bread or not, but bread is such a staple in many of our diets and really is a big source of carbohydrate for so many, I thought it would be really important to start this episode with this context of bread and carbohydrate is not bad. In fact, getting carbohydrate from these healthy food sources such as whole grains really is key to helping us keep our protein in check, making sure that we're getting adequate calories, adequate fiber, adequate nutrients, and all of these things. I think that carbs get a bad rap because we do tend to eat most of our carbohydrates from perhaps the not as healthful sources. Not saying these foods are bad, obviously, but we tend to get a lot of our carbohydrate from things like sugar. Okay, we know that lots of sugar isn't great for us from a kidney stone as well as general health standpoint, right? Also, a lot of refined carbohydrates. So I'm thinking like white rice, white bread, white pasta, right? These types of things. Again, not saying that you can't eat these things, but when you're eating a majority of your carbohydrate from these more processed things, that tends to, we're not getting then, of course, the benefits of fiber. We also tend to eat these things in super large portions, right? Like it is very different to have, a cup or two of pasta versus a giant plate of it, right? Like you get the picture, right? These things are not bad. It's more, as I always say, looking at the big picture and how these foods fit into your entire dietary pattern. Obviously, our whole diet shouldn't be carbohydrate, just like our whole diet shouldn't be fat and our whole diet shouldn't be protein, right? It's really about balance and putting these things together in a healthful way. Of course, there are exceptions to this rule, right? I've definitely worked with people who are following a ketogenic diet, perhaps for epilepsy, which is the reason that a ketogenic diet was initially sort of discovered or founded, was to treat epilepsy, and it still is used as a treatment for epilepsy that isn't, the other treatments aren't working for, right? The ketogenic diet is kind of a last resort because it's obviously so restrictive. So in that case, obviously, we're following these super strict, very low carbohydrate diets for a therapeutic reason. That makes sense, right? And there's other things that we can do to help at least reduce the risk of kidney stones when you have to follow that diet for another reason. Another comment that I always get whenever I talk about carbohydrates is diabetes. And I have diabetes. I can't eat carbohydrates. And that is one of the biggest misconceptions, I'd say, when it comes to nutrition right now in 2025. If you have diabetes or pre-diabetes or you're trying to control your blood sugar, you do not need to, nor should you, I'd argue, be on a low carbohydrate diet. Instead, the goal is to eat carbohydrate mostly from those healthy whole food sources. So things like whole grains, which we'll talk about in a second, fruit and dairy, the exact same foods that we talk about for kidney stone prevention, right? Instead, it's more about learning how to put together an entire dietary pattern and how to eat these foods in appropriate portions, as well as pair them with protein and fat to help sort of blunt that blood glucose response, and making sure you're getting in enough fiber, again, to help, sort of blunt that blood glucose response. So again, the goal with diabetes is definitely should never be low carbohydrate. Of course, eating a ton of sugar and refined carbohydrate is not great for people with diabetes, nor is it great for most people in general, right, for general health. But instead, with blood sugar, it's more about learning how to eat, getting carbohydrate from these healthy food sources, as well as pairing that carbohydrate with the other macronutrients to make sure that you're eating that balanced meal, and that overall is going to help manage your blood sugar responses. Also, when I think about how much protein is right for someone, and actually I'm going to record a episode on protein and kidney stones shortly, so definitely look out for that. This is one of the reasons why I say kidney stone nutrition isn't one size fits all, right? Certainly for some people, eating protein can exacerbate kidney stone risk, right? Also, proteins are not equal. We know plant proteins in general are much easier on the kidneys and do not increase kidney stone risk at all, whereas animal proteins other than dairy do tend to increase that risk. But if you do have diabetes, I probably am going to recommend a slightly higher amount of protein for you than someone who doesn't, if protein is a concern for you, right? So I feel like we like to put nutrition in this black and white thinking because it's easy, right? And there's so much nuance in nutrition. It's not the most straightforward thing because food is not straightforward. And there's so many factors that come into play about why we eat, what we eat, et cetera, et cetera. So when I come in and say carbs are good, people who have diabetes panic. They're like, oh no, but I can't have carbs. I have to eat a low carb diet. No, you don't. And they say, oh, well, I need to eat all this protein. Well, yeah, maybe you need a little bit more protein, but that doesn't mean that you need to like stuff yourself full of protein, especially when we consider that most people in the country are eating more protein than they need actually. So I guess I just wanted to kind of call out this nuance because it really isn't black and white. And you totally can eat for both diabetes and kidney stone prevention. In fact, I'd argue that they have to go hand in hand because, a lot of people who have diabetes have kidney stones. Diabetes puts you at higher risk of kidney stones for a variety of reasons. And so these things are not different. These things have to mesh. They do mesh. And as soon as you start to look at the science and the data of what actually benefits both diabetes and kidney stones, it really becomes a lot more clear and it makes a whole lot more sense because really, honestly, guys, it's very much the same. But the problem is that we hyper-focus on these nutrients. We say, oh, protein is bad for kidney stones. So that means I can't eat protein, but protein is good for diabetes. So that means I do have to eat protein. Therefore, these things cannot coexist, right? And that's so not true. It's all about balance. It's all about meal patterns. And again, putting together entire meal patterns that work for you and your nutrition goals. So moving into the difference between a whole grain and refined grain, because I feel like we throw around this term of whole grain and like, what does that even mean? I even had a very well-respected doctor ask me once, well, Melanie, like, what is a whole grain? Like, what foods actually have whole grains? And so I wanted to kind of break it down to show you what the differences are, because we know whole grains are great, and spoiler alert, I'm going to talk about why whole grains are actually a better choice for people with kidney stones as well. But what is a whole grain anyway? And really it comes down to what parts of the grain itself are intact, right? So when you think about an actual like grain, like a kernel of wheat or something like that, or corn even, right? These grains have three parts. They have a bran, a germ, and an endosperm. And a whole grain includes all three of those parts. But a refined grain, the bran and the germ are removed during processing. So, think about whole grain flour versus white flour, right? That white flour is going to have just the endosperm left because the bran and the germ have been removed. Unfortunately, the bran and the germ really are where most of the nutrition comes from in that grain. That's where a lot of the fiber is. That's where a lot of that great plant-based protein comes from. That's a lot of the vitamins and minerals and phytochemicals and antioxidants and all of those good things. Also where the oxalate tends to be, which of course we'll talk about a bit later. So that's really that difference, right? A whole grain includes all three of those grain parts, bran, germ, and endosperm. Refined grains just include the endosperm. So when we look at actual foods, which foods are considered a whole grain, right? Which foods have all three of those parts? We're looking at, say, corn. I mentioned that before. Say whole grain oatmeal, whole grain flour, whole grain pasta, oatmeal, brown rice, whole wheat bread, which we'll talk about later when we talk a little bit more about bread, whole wheat pasta, right? Anything that says whole wheat is really going to that means all three of those parts are intact. But on the other side of the coin here's some example of some refined grains. We've got that white flour, like I mentioned, white bread, just plain corn flour if it doesn't specify that it is whole wheat. Also white rice, jasmine rice, arborio rice are all refined rices that the other parts of that grain have been taken away. So you get the idea. And I think it can be difficult when you're looking at a food product to see if it really is whole grain. One easy way to tell if something is more likely to be a whole grain is look at the fiber content, right? If there's at least 3 grams of fiber or so per slice or per serving, that's a really good sign that it actually is a whole grain because again, a lot of the fiber or most of the fiber is really coming from that bran and germ, which are only intact in a whole grain product. But you can also look at the ingredients, and if the ingredient says, if you're looking at, say, crackers, and if you want to see if it's really whole grain, if you see like whole grain flour in there or something like that, that's going to be a pretty good indication that it is a whole grain. But ultimately, honestly, we're mostly after that fiber. And so if you just look at the fiber line on that nutrition facts label, when you're looking for whole grains in any of these types of foods, really looking at that fiber and trying to choose a product that has the higher amount of fiber is going to be a really, really great way to help guide you towards more whole grain products. Now moving on to the question of the hour, or the 20-minute episode or so, which bread is best for people with kidney stones? Historically, because there's been this overwhelming fear and unfounded fear of oxalate, we've told people with kidney stones to choose white bread products and white pasta over their whole wheat counterparts, just because these things have less oxalate in them. And they do, right? Because as I mentioned, oxalate comes with that bran part of the grain. And so these white bread, white pasta, white rice are all going to have less oxalate in them because we've taken away that part of the grain. However, as you just learned, that part of the grain also comes with all of the other health benefits of eating that grain, or essentially all of them, right? Certainly calories can be a health benefit too, but you get my point, right? You also then took away the fiber, you took away that plant protein, you took away vitamins and minerals, antioxidants, phytochemicals, all of these wonderful things about why we want people to be eating whole grains. And so I would say that I recommend whole grain carbohydrate, whether it is whole grain bread, white or whole grain pasta, brown rice, etc., over their white counterparts, because these things have fiber in them. They also have other things that ironically are good for kidney stones, which makes sense because when you look at the big picture and look to see when people make kidney stones, which type of bread are they more likely to eat? People who eat whole grain bread are less likely to form kidney stones, despite the fact that whole grain bread does have more oxalate in it. And you see this again and again and again. Same thing with beans and nuts and seeds and more plant-forward diets, right? So again, just really highlighting that we should not be making these recommendations just based on oxalate. It is very narrow-minded and not backed in research whatsoever. We see again and again and again people who eat more whole grains, whether it be bread or brown rice or whatever we're talking about, these people tend to have fewer kidney stones, despite the fact that they are eating more oxalate. And I think it is because, yes, whole grains have more oxalate, but they also have these other good things that are beneficial for kidney stone prevention specifically. Whole grains are one of the few sources and one of the very difficult to get nutrients of magnesium. And we know that eating more magnesium can be really beneficial for preventing oxalate kidney stones. We also know that whole grains are a great source of phytate, which is a really potent inhibitor of any sort of calcium-based stone. And there's other benefits in there as well, right? But overall, when you look at the big picture, yes, there's more oxalate, but it is very clear in my mind that the benefits of all these other things in there outweigh the higher oxalate content. The benefits outweigh that con of oxalate, and you simply cannot consume a low oxalate diet that is adequate in these other things. And one of the main reasons is because these whole grains are going to be so much higher in oxalate. But the big answer to the episode today is that whole grain bread is definitely what I recommend across the board for people who have kidney stones. I do want to say, because I always like to put things in context, right? A lot of times people say, well, Melanie, I don't like brown rice. I like white rice. To which I say, cool, eat white rice, right? I'm not saying that you cannot eat white bread or white pasta or white rice, but please do not choose them thinking that they are better for kidney stone prevention. And also, all of your grains don't have to be whole necessarily. The dietary guidelines for Americans, at least currently as of the 2020 version, say that at least half of our grains should be whole. I would say that's maybe a minimum. I would love that to be a little bit higher, but you get the idea, right? It's not that 100% of your grains have to be whole grains. I love, certain pasta dishes that I make are so delicious, and I just do not want that whole grain pasta with them. And that's totally cool, right? Or if I'm making who doesn't love a BLT sandwich, that's so delicious. Obviously there's tons of sodium and other things in there, but if you really want that BLT sandwich and you really just want that piece of white bread with it, please have the white bread and move on with your life, right? The goal is not that 100% of your grains have to be these whole grains, but instead we should be shifting more of them to be whole grains, since most of the grains that we consume in the United States, at least, are not coming from these whole grain sources. So just really like to give that caveat. If you really love that white rice, and rice I feel like is a very hot topic because rice is so crucial to so many cultures' cuisine, which is so wonderful. And as soon as you kind of introduce that brown rice, it kind of like totally ruins the whole aesthetic of a lot of cultural dishes, and that's totally fine. So I always like to throw that out there. We're not aiming for all. There's totally other ways to get in whole grains, totally other ways to get in fiber. It doesn't have to be 100%. If you love that white rice or white pasta or white bread or refined carbohydrate in specific dishes, totally cool. Please do that. But please do not switch from a whole grain thinking that it's going to be better for kidney stones. Two other things that I always like to look for when I'm thinking about bread and healthy breads for kidney stones. In addition to that whole grain, I want you to be getting that fiber and the other benefits that whole grain offers. Bread is unfortunately a very sneaky source of sodium. And we talk extensively about sodium and that's impact on kidney stones. And bread is actually one of the highest sources of sodium in our diets. It's not when you think about salad dressing or soy sauce, it certainly doesn't have that much sodium per serving, but we tend to eat so much bread, it sneaks up as one of the highest sources of sodium in the American diet. And so I think it's really important to look at that nutrition label, of course, and look to see how much sodium is in a slice of bread. I like to give the realistic cutoff of no more than, say, 150-ish milligrams of sodium per slice of bread. You're never going to find something with 0 because bread inherently is going to have some sodium in it. Also, it's needed for yeast, et cetera, et cetera. But just be mindful and try to choose a bread that isn't excessively high in sodium. And I like to use that 150-ish, 160-ish milligrams cutoff as a realistic cutoff for a, quote, healthy slice of bread. And the other thing that you want to look for is added sugar. Of course, we know that eating a ton of added sugar is not great for general health and certainly can increase the risk of kidney stones. And so you also want to be mindful that you're not finding a bread that has a ton of added sugar in it. So there you have it. Whole grain bread is going to be the best bread for kidney stones, certainly over sort of a white or refined bread. A lot of times people ask about multi-grain bread. I feel like multi-grain tends to be a whole grain bread. It just sounds a little bit fancier. But of course, look at those ingredients. Make sure that whatever multi-grain, that just means multiple grains in there, right? Just make sure that whatever multiple grain flours that they're using to make that bread do include whole grain versions of them. People will often ask about rye. Rye is just a different type of grain, and it can be hard to find, but it does exist. You can find whole grain rye bread, and that can be a great way. But if you're getting just plain rye bread, that's really going to be likely a refined bread. It's just refined rye that was used to make that bread. Other common breads I get asked about is sourdough. Sourdough is delicious, of course, but really is a refined grain at the end of the day. There is a little bit of data that shows that maybe because of the fermenting process, it might be slightly better with blood glucose. That's, kind of beyond the scope of this podcast. I would categorize that generally as a refined bread. So something to enjoy once in a while. Of course, I love a good slice of sourdough, but probably wouldn't count, if you will, for one of those whole grains. I will also link to a blog post on my website that is about rice and kidney stones, which I understand is not bread, but the same principles apply. In that blog post, I really break down the benefits of eating a whole grain or a brown rice over a white rice when it comes to kidney stones, and all of those same principles apply for bread. So I will link to that because I know that, that a lot of people like to follow up and read whatever I'm talking about in the podcast. So I will do that, and hopefully that's helpful. As always, I like to end the podcast by reminding you that if you have a question like this that you would like me to tackle on the podcast, please, I would love to hear from you. If you just head to kidneystonepodcast.com, you can record your question for a chance to get answered on the podcast. As always, I hope you have a wonderful day, and I will see you again next week. Thank you for listening to today's episode. For more help with kidney stones, check out my website, www.thekidneydietitian.org. For more personalized help from me, check out my online course, Kidney Stone Nutrition School. VIP enrollment includes help directly from me. I can't wait to see you there and help you prevent kidney stones. Have a great day.